Okay, hello. My name is Lisa Black, and I am one of the Rogue Women writers. We're a group of 9 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officers to cops to psychotherapists to journalists. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question that you'd like to ask. This will be monitored in real time, and there will be plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. And let's use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors. As I said, my name is Lisa Black. I am the author of 16 forensic suspense novels, which also happens to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, working with my local police department, and I'm delighted to be emceeing this event tonight. Now, before we get to our authors tonight, our 4 authors, we have a special hello from one of our own Rogue Women writers, Karna Small Bodman, to talk about her new children's book, Wrigley at the White House. So Karna, tell us about what inspired this book and what it's about.
Oh, Lisa, thanks. And obviously, children's book. This is the book, Wrigley at the White House. It was inspired because I did serve 6 years in the White House. First as Deputy Press Secretary, later as Senior Director of the National Security Council. And those experiences inspired the 5 political thrillers that I have out there. Each one is about a national security threat. Well, boy, talk about switching genres. I had an idea because we have a lot of friends who have children and even grandchildren. And of course, most don't know anything about the White House. Maybe you never heard of it. So I had a thought about creating a story that would entertain kids, but would also show them what that White House is like. And in fact, I have a blurb. We all get a blurb, which I thought was really nice from Carlin Eggers. A charming story for children who will laugh at the dog and learn about the White House. And what it's about these 2 children, like nothing political. They live in the White House. Their dad is the president, and they get a dog named Wrigley. I'm from Chicago, so I named him Wrigley. And they get the puppy for their birthday. Well, the dog then runs around the famous building, getting into all kinds of trouble, but solving a mystery for the president. And the point is, I have a wonderful illustrator, Susan Spellman. She's done 30 children's books. She did authentic pictures, because I sent her pictures of the White House, even and all of that. And so, for example, let me give you just a little kind of an example. When the dog's running around, he runs into the Red Room, okay? And there is the portrait of Dolly Madison, in the Red Room. The kids can see that. He runs in and flips over the flower cart and gets into trouble where they're setting up for a state dinner, into the state dining room. And there's the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, which it's right, it's right there. So it's the first in a whole series. And should I just read just a page or 2 and you can sort of get the idea. It's in rhyme, okay? The White House, the White House is a special home of our first family. Our president, first lady, and their twins live happily. Up in the family quarters, the staff is in a tizzy, preparing now for royal guests. The president is busy. He checks a book he'll give to them as a gift, then goes to celebrate the birthday of his boy and girl. They can hardly wait. The twins are so excited because today they just turned 4. A special birthday present is just behind the door. And this is where they see the puppy. And they open it, see a box, and ask, "Oh, what's inside?" They lift the lid and peer right in. A puppy, they both cry. So there you have it. It's a story. And if any of you have children, or maybe you know anybody with grandchildren and you want to check it out, it's on Amazon and up hardback and a lot of the bookstores too. So thanks for thanks for the promotion. I appreciate it, Lisa.
Okay, so you're not only a novelist, you're a poet as well. We did not know that.
It's fun, but now I'm going to be quiet and sit back, and I can't wait to hear from our wonderful authors. We have, our own rogues, and then we also have my personal friend Ellen Crosby and others here. So this is going to be a great night. I'm glad y'all are here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, and the first author up is our very own, another one of our very own rogues. TOSCA Lee is a multi-award-winning author, co-author, option screenwriter, and Mrs. America first runner-up. She lives in Nebraska with her husband and 2 of their 4 children still at home. And her posts often feature her 160-pound German Shepherd, Timber. Tosca's favorite snack while doing anything is buttered popcorn, which I am totally on board with, and kombucha. But foods she discovered while writing for the book include Southern chocolate gravy and pandesal. See our website for recipes. The Long March Home debuted on May 2nd. And in it, 3 small town boys join the army together, enjoying their station in the Philippines until Pearl Harbor is attacked. Within hours, a battle for control of the Pacific Theater culminates with the largest surrender of American troops in history. And what follows will become known as one of the worst atrocities in modern warfare, the Bataan Death March. And that ordeal is only the beginning of their nearly 4-year fight to survive. So inspired by true stories, The Long March Home is a gripping tale of friendship, sacrifice, and the power of unrelenting hope. Now, Tosca co-wrote this book with Marcus Brotherton. Now, tell us, how did you meet up with him? How did you come to co-write a book, and how did this whole project
So this is a book that took a total of 12 years to write. And my co-author, Marcus Brotherton, is probably best known for his World War II nonfiction. And he called me up in about 2017, and he has written one other novel before, and he actually asked me to endorse that a few years before that. And I endorsed it. It was a fabulous book. It's called Feast for Thieves. And so he called me up in 2017 and said, I've been working on this project for about 7 years already about the Bataan Death March. And I said, the what? Because I was not familiar with this chapter of World War II history. And he explained it to me, told me about the story. He said that he felt like he needed to bring another author on, and would I join him? And I said, this sounds like a really important story. And yeah. So I added 5 years to the process. So it took 12 years total. So it's been a long time in the making, this book.
Wow. It's deserved, though. I mean, I grew up with parents who lived during World War II. They were married in 1940. And my husband is a huge history buff. He lives on the History Channel. And I mean, for our 25th wedding anniversary, I treated him to a World War II battlefield tour. That's so, it's like, to me, the Bataan Death March is like saying, you know, Brad Pitt married Angelina Jolie. It's like,
right.
Well, yeah, how's that? So,
yeah.
So, very interesting story.
Thank you.
Only now I'm choking on popcorn, which I
very hard to type with buttered popcorn, by the way. It's a great writing snack, but very hard to type with buttery fingers.
True. Okay, now our other guest, the writer LIV Constantine, is, of course, the talented combined talents of 2 sisters and former Rogue women writers, Lynn and Valerie. They are internationally best-selling authors with works translated into 28 languages, and The Last Mrs. Parrish was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. Lynn has a business degree and loves the beach, exploring coral reefs and sunken wrecks all over the world. Val also loves to travel, as she used to work in the White House, scheduling and planning the president's trips. She has visited over 40 foreign countries, and she and her husband are always adding more to the list. Their new book, which will debut on May 23rd, is The Senator's Wife. Widowed DC philanthropist Sloan, recently married to widower Senator Witt, is managing the DC social scene that's required of her, while she's also preparing for a hip replacement due to lupus. They hire home health aide, Athena, who at first seems to be a godsend. But Sloane's health and influence start to wane dramatically, and she begins to wonder if Athena might be the reason. Lynn and Val like to snack on a Greek favorite, sliced feta cheese, Kalamata olives, and crusty Greek bread dipped in virgin olive oil. Their drink, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The perfect accompaniment to the Washington, D.C. setting of The Senator's Wife and the favorite drink of one of its characters. You will also find the recipe for this on our website. So let's plunge right in. Tell us about the Netflix deal.
Oh my goodness.
If you can, if you're not like sworn to secrecy or something.
No. Well, it was, we have an option that was renewed. And we have two very talented writers attached, which our producers super excited about. But as you know, the writer's strike is ongoing right now. So everything is on hold until that's resolved. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, bummer.
Right. I know.
A lot of people in the same space,
Exactly.
but we're with the writers.
We are with the writers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understand totally.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay. Well, we will come back to that. Ellen Crosby, sorry, is a former freelance journalist who's lived in Madrid, London, Moscow, and Geneva, for a while serving as the ABC radio news correspondent in Moscow. Before that, she was an economist for the United States Senate. She used those experiences in her novels, but after settling back home in Virginia, she now also writes a series revolving around that state's wine industry. Her next book, Blow Up, came out on May 3rd. And in this third book in the Sophie Medina series, I don't know if that's Medina or Medina.
Medina.
The international photojournalist is outrunning and finds Associate Supreme Court Justice Everett Townsend lying in an alley. A friend of Sophie's tells her a shocking story about Townsend that could have a devastating impact on the nation's highest court if word got out. When the friend is then murdered, Sophie is left to search through her photographs for evidence before the assassin comes for her. And both Ellen's and Sophie's favorite drink and snack is champagne and strawberries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fruit, so it's healthy, right?
Right.
So Sophie is a photographer. I assume you had to take many of your own photographs when you were a journalist? Did you do 35 millimeter? Was it digital?
No, I was really lucky. I had some wonderful photographers I worked with, and the Washington Post had a great guy who worked with me. One of the stories that we did, where I think is probably one of the most memorable photographs, was every 3 years, every airport in the country has to have a national security drill. And I live literally down the street from Dulles Airport. Their flight path is over our house from time to time. So as you all know, 9/11, some of the planes left from Dulles. So that counted as an event. And so the next event after that was in 2004. And I was working for the Post then. And my editor said to me, will you go take a picture? Will you go write the story of the drill? And so what they do is they create a scenario, something's happening. There's a away from the airport, and they have like a fuselage out there. They bring in the fire department, they bring in the police department, but since we're Metro Washington, everybody came from Washington, Virginia, Maryland, and it's this very, very big deal because it's the first one after 9/11. And the scenario was, pardon me, that terrorists are shooting down a plane and it catches fire and it crashes, and then what's everybody going to do? So they had, like, the Boy Scouts were there, and a lot of people were already they were victims, so they were wearing signs around their necks saying, that what had happened to them, and they were flown off to hospitals and taken by ambulance and everything else. So it was really very dramatic. And so the picture my photographer got is this plane in flames. And I mean, he was a very good photographer. But all my stories usually ended up, for the journalists out there, front page above the fold. So, and a lot of them had to do with this photographer. And I was always so impressed by the fact that, a journalist gets a lot of words to tell a story, but a photographer, if you get that one image, it says everything. So.
Wow. I do something similar like that with femurs. It's the Florida, like DMORT, only with, Florida. And we have every 2 years, we have to like physically go to training, and they have a whole training exercise, and we got, you know, mannequins and all sorts of things. And it's a huge project. It really is.
What happened at Dulles?
What
happened at Dulles was the site where they do it is away from the airport, but it's on the grounds of the airport. And of course, you don't want to terrify all the passengers.
Yes.
Everything was done quietly. So there were no lights and sirens. The helicopters left, but, you know, to take the victims to the hospitals. They really did everything, but it had to be very, very quiet. So it was unusual. And then the FBI came, because then they had the people coming to hunt down the terrorists. So it was a very unusual story, but that photograph, oof, it was amazing.
Wow. Okay, well, our last author, last but not least, multi-award winning author Dr. D.P. Lyle has been answering medical questions for other mystery authors, including me, for years. If you have any, check out his blog. He's probably already answered it. He's also worked with many novelists and TV writers for shows such as Law and Order, Royal Pains, House, Medium, and CSI Miami. He grew up in Alabama, but currently practices cardiology in Southern California. In Cultured, his new book, ex-pro ball player turned restaurateur Jake Longley is living his best life until his PI father talks Jake and his girlfriend into going undercover to find out what happens to a missing woman. Wealthy young April was last seen finding herself and maybe some financial management tips at the self-help resort of Jonathan Lindemann. But the more questions Jake asks, the more he wonders, do any of the clients actually make financial gains? And do any of them actually ever leave? Jake's favorite drink is bourbon. You didn't say rocks or not, so I just have without rocks. And his favorite snack food are fish tacos from his own restaurant, Captain Rocky's. So my one question for you is, are you still working, and how do you find time to do all this if you are? Oh, and you're muted.
I did that because I didn't want to hear me drinking my bourbon. And the recipe is not on my website because it's easy. Glass bourbon. You can figure it out from there. Yes, I'm still working. I still practice cardiology, but then I have plenty of time. There's 24 hours in the day, and you only need 5 of them to sleep. So the rest of it, you can do what you want to do.
Maybe you only need 5.
All my life used to drive my parents crazy. I'd be out of the house at 4:30 in the morning, terrorizing the neighborhood, and they never could figure it out. And we still get up around here at 4:30 to 5:30, something like that. And I get down here and I'm on the computer. There's plenty of time. It's time's not the issue. It's just sitting down and doing it. You're doing all the heavy lifting. But fortunately, this book is now out. It came out May the 2nd, and the next one in the series, which is May the 7th, is already done, and it'll be out in a year from now. So, yeah, I try to stay a year ahead.
Yeah. Cool beans. Sheesh. No wonder you get so much done. Okay, now we're going to go back around to each of our authors and hopefully hear you read from your new books, which our readers absolutely love. So let's go back to Tosca and start with her.
Okay. Well, I'm not starting at the very beginning. I'm cheating. I'm starting right about there in chapter 9. So this is right in the middle of the war. So one thing I learned very quickly when I was researching this book is that within hours of Pearl Harbor being bombed, the Philippines was plunged into war, and they were bombed as well. And what would start a war that would last until April of the following year, 1942. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 9. This is January 2nd, 1942, Bataan Peninsula, Philippines. Manila's on fire. Black smoke blots out the sun rising over the bay. The Japanese bombed the capital the same day it was declared an open city, blasting port area and all the supplies left in it. They've bombed it every day since. Having established our main defense, we move north to set up a delay line at Lake Junction where all the roads to Baton converge. We string barbed wire and dig foxholes, dive into trenches when the planes come to rake us by the hour. Our Christmas haul is long gone, including the bean stew cook made with the last of the ham. We eat a single hot meal after dark, sea rations during the day. Tonight, Hank waves Buggy, the radio man, over, offers him a swig of gin, and asks for news. The ex-linebacker drinks deep and passes the bottle back. Heard the last of the Asiatic fleet left for Australia a couple days ago, he says. I stare at him in the darkness. That don't make sense. Just like the planes, Billy murmurs. I wonder what they're hearing about this at home. Could Roosevelt be launching the rescue from Australia, Hank asks. Possible. I'll keep my ear to the ground, Buggy says. The next morning, we learned Buggy and 2 other men drove into an ambush while laying communications wire in the middle of the night. No one survived. Hank takes it hard. We all do. Buggy's the first man we knew personally to die in the war. It's weird to think he'll never go home, Billy says quietly the next day. It's Billy's birthday. He's 17. This morning, Hank gave him a can of Franks and beans he held back from one of our runs and a pack of sea ration chewing gum. I gave him a roll of toilet paper I filched from our last stop at the Pikes Hotel. Who'd want to go back to Nebraska anyway, Hank says, mussing Billy's hair. And I know he's just trying to lift Billy's spirits. Ain't you heard? It freezes there in winter. Besides, Buggy don't care no more. He's walking those golden streets. But it does something to me thinking of that, of Buggy being separated from his family here, alone, permanently, of them never visiting his grave, maybe not even knowing exactly where he's been laid. My daddy would say it don't matter, that if he believed right and towed the line, he's already in the presence of the Almighty. But the thought works on me, maybe because even though I had no plans to go back to Alabama, it was always at least an option.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you. The Buggy thing is the tongue-in-cheek thing because the kids from Nebraska, and back in the day, the Nebraska football team was called the Bug Eaters, which is just the most embarrassing thing. And Cornhuskers is such an upgrade compared to that. So
that was their official name?
The Bug Eaters. Yep. For real.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I wonder who came up with that one.
I don't know.
So you've written both books set in biblical times and books set in like a post-apocalyptic landscape with dealing with themes of good versus evil and very high stakes. Is there a parallel that you see between those books and this sort of the Bataan Death March was so bleak that it was to these young men their own personal apocalypse?
Yeah, I think so, because there's so many times in the story. There's an earthquake at one point. There's other times when they're blowing up ammo dumps. Where it just seems like maybe this is it. This is the end. And these are boys that grew up, the main character is a pastor's son. So for him, it could be the apocalypse he's always heard about. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Now you've also co-written with Ted Decker on very different subject matter, sort of fantasy / paranormal series. So how is this co-writing project different because it involves so much nonfiction?
Yeah, this was really different because when I wrote with Ted, we brainstormed from the ground up and we plotted everything together. And we started after our agents shook hands and did the deal. So this one, Marcus was working on this on spec. And so when he called me and said, are you interested? And I said, yes, he did something very unusual that I think as writers, we would find very unusual. And that is he sent me all his stuff. He sent me the draft that he had. He sent me his research. He sent me everything. And he just said, this is now yours, make it your own and go for it. And so I went in, I started dismantling it, pulling out wires and digging around and seeing what was in there and then adding stuff. And you know, I think that's a very open-handed, generous way to go about this process. And it shows a great deal of trust on his part. And I'm very grateful for that because it allowed me to be fully creative and very free.
Mm-hmm. So from your social media posts, you clearly love to travel. Like, what is your favorite spot in the world and what is next on your travel bucket list?
Oh, okay. So I have 2 favorite spots. The first is the place I've never been. But my real other place I've been that's my favorite is Bora Bora. My husband and I love to go to the South Pacific, but we specifically love Bora Bora. And we had our honeymoon there, and we had our second kind of private ceremony there. And I love that. And bucket list is in August. You know, I got braces a few months ago, and I'm struggling. I have problems now. And they said they would be off by my book release, and they lied. But the next one is August. We're going to Iceland, which I've never been to. So my mother gives each of our kids a trip when they graduate. And we have twins who just graduated. So the one twin got the Galapagos, and Brian and I just tag along because, you know, so we did the Galapagos with National Geographic in December and January. And now we're going to go to Iceland with the other twin and tag along on that one.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. There's Tahiti is like, it's just hard to describe, but
yeah.
And Iceland, like my favorite jogging video on our treadmill is this waterfall in Iceland. I'm like, I want to go there.
I can't wait.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to move over to Val and Lynn, collectively known as LIV Constantine, and let's hear from their book.
Well, Tosca, I'm not trying to copy you, but I'm also reading from chapter 9.
It's a sign of greatness.
Right. Something about the 9s tonight. This is Athena, who is going to become a carer for Sloane when she has her surgery. Athena placed a mug of black coffee on the table next to Clint, where he sat reading the 4 pages of notes she'd given him. His lanky frame sprawled from the chair, one long leg crossed over the knee of the other, and he rubbed 2 fingers against his temple as he scanned the text. Athena watched his face for any reaction, but as always, he betrayed no hint of what he might be thinking. It was something she'd learned from him and tried to emulate, not always successfully. When he flipped 2 pages back to reread something, Athena began impatiently tapping her finger on the arm of the chair. Clint stopped reading and stared at her. "Do you mind?" he said. Athena crossed her arms and raised her chin. "Not at all. Take all the time you want." He put down the papers and picked up the coffee, taking a long swallow before speaking. "Look, we're on the same side, remember? We'll have all the bases covered before your interview with the senator. So let's relax and address the things you've outlined here. I know you're a little nervous, but everything will be fine." Athena closed her eyes and let out a big breath. "You're right," she admitted. "I think I'm more impatient than nervous. I just want to get this interview over with and stop playing out scenarios in my head." "I understand. Too much thinking can drive you crazy," he said, picking up her notes and turning to the first page. "Don't let the vaunted Senate office and all the trappings of power intimidate you. You know the saying, he puts his pants on the same way everybody else does." I know. If you get a tough question, buy yourself time. Don't rush. Take a deep breath and ask him to repeat the question. You've got this." Athena gave him a probing look. There's a lot at stake, a lot to play for. Clint had no idea exactly how much was at stake for her personally, and she had no intention of telling him. There is, and that's why we're over-preparing." "Right," she said. "I've done extensive research. I know what his hot buttons are." "Good." Clint nodded, his dark gaze becoming hard. "Anything come up on the first husband, Robert Chase, that we might have missed?" "No, and nothing on the senator's widow," she said. "No longer a widow, now a wife again." Clint cocked his head. "Righto. I'm curious to meet the eminent Sloane Emerson Chase Montgomery, living in her Georgetown mansion without a worry in the world." Clint smirked and looked at his watch. "It's later than I realized. I need to get going." She watched him walk down the hall and into the elevator. Closing the door, she felt the familiar loneliness descend upon her. Nights were the worst. Dinner by herself and an evening alone stretching ahead of her. Too much time to think about how empty her life was. She clenched her jaw, berating herself for being so self-absorbed. A walk would do her good, get her mind off herself. The evening was warm and the streets of Adams Morgan crowded. She walked along 18th Street, past the colorful shops and eclectic restaurants until she came to Lost City Books, one of her favorite haunts. Athena loved the comforting smell of old books, the fine feel of rare volumes. She pulled a book from the shelf, A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, and opening to a random page read, "We cast a shadow on something wherever we stand, and it is no good moving from place to save things, because the shadow always follows." She closed the book and with tears in her eyes wondered for the millionth time what her life would be like if she'd made a different choice that day, and if the shadow would follow her forever.
Wow. A lot going on there, what you're hinting at. So I can see that would be extremely intriguing. Now, Sloane has lupus, which is how Athena comes into her life. Why lupus? Did you pick that as a foil for her for some personal reason, or because of the characteristics of the disease, that it's degenerative, but it's not visible and it's can be somewhat unpredictable?
Yes, to all of the above. Yes, yes. We have had a close cousin that had lupus for many, that dealt with lupus for many years. So we saw what the disease did, and we did also want to choose something that where she could appear like she was fine, and yet was still dealing with that, which is another. I think when people can see what your illness is, it's a little bit different. But when someone appears to be healthy but is struggling, that's a whole another element and a layer of having to deal with an illness.
What I love about this plot is that it shows how you can be incredibly wealthy and privileged and beautiful people with such power and opportunity and still have all the same vulnerabilities as anybody else. It's like, does my spouse really love me? Is, he attracted to that other person instead of me? It's like, is this something that like purposely worked in? Because I noticed, she's vulnerable because she just had an operation, and then she's vulnerable because she's got this disease that makes that even more difficult, and then she's vulnerable because she's hasn't been married that long maybe, and she's older, and we all know what that's like when you got a younger woman, and now this person you're letting a stranger into your home because you have to, not because you want to. And it's, was this, do you purposely like work in all these vulnerabilities, or was it just like a happy accident, or? Sorry, that's a lot in one question.
That was a lot. No, I think that's all. I think people need, or maybe even need to be reminded, or like being reminded that yes, it just because there is a lot of money, or as you said, you're in a position of power, that doesn't mean that your life is perfect. Nobody's life is perfect. Everybody, we all have the same problems. I know many people would say, well, it's easier to have those problems if you have money, and that's true in many cases. But the fact is that it still hurts just as much. It hurts just as much to have lupus if you're wealthy as if you're not, and all of the other things that are part of the book. And I think that's something people need to know
right. And I think too, to the vulnerability, we wanted Sloane to be a very sort of more of a deep thinker. So she's not threatened initially. She interviews Athena, and Athena is beautiful, and she is younger, but Sloane has enough confidence in herself that she's not, at first she's a little bit taken by how beautiful she is, but then she thinks to herself, well, that's really unfair for me to, to judge her negatively because of that. That's ridiculous. And so it isn't like a jealousy or a vulnerability that occurs immediately, but I think it's, it's also this sense of growing isolation that Sloane feels as she becomes sicker and sicker, and she's then stuck in her room, and she's hearing life going on in her house, without her. And that is such a lonely feeling, regardless of who else is there. So it is exacerbated, ultimately when she starts to wonder, oh, is my husband looking at her a little bit more than he should? Or are they spending more time together? What's going on? But it wasn't an initial thing. We wanted to make it clear that she wasn't worried right away that this young, beautiful was coming into her home. Yeah. Maybe she should be, but she wasn't.
Yeah. So it's like, woman, have you never seen The Hand That Rocks the Cradle? Come on.
I know.
So who came up with Liv is I assume it's like the L for Lynn and the V for Val.
It is, right. Okay.
So
well,
who
at
came
first,
up with that?
we each wanted our name. You know, we wanted two names on the book at the beginning, and so we met with our editor and with our agent, and the four of us were having lunch together and making, and talking about that. What are we going to do on the books? And they said, your names are long. It's going to take up too much room to put both of the names on the book. So we need to come up with one name. And so, of course, the first thing we suggested was initials, to put LV Constantine. And the response was, where initials are just, they're
initial fatigue.
There's initial fatigue, yes. Right. Which was a new one. Anyway, so, and one of us said, well, how about if we take the two initials and we put a vowel in between them? And the only one that really seemed to work was an I between L and V. There were really not too many others. And that's how it came to be. So
we could have been Love, but we thought that might give the wrong.
That would have been good.
Yeah. Yeah, that might give the wrong impression for a thriller. So now Lynn's Elsie Shaw book, The Network, is also going to be a film series. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I hope it is. I'm just in the beginning stages. I wrote a pilot for it, and I'm shopping it around, but it hasn't been optioned. But I have a vision for that as a show. But ironically, with that, I was going to use a name, and at that point, I didn't want to do initials, and apparently, initial fatigue was over, and that was what. So it's a little,
yeah, I know what you mean. Publishers are all like, oh no, you absolutely can't do that, and then it's like 2 years later, oh, you have to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. Okay, well, that's very interesting. So let's move on. Unfortunately, we have to keep going, so let's move on to Ellen and hear something from Blow Up.
Okay, so Blow Up is the third book in the Sophie Medina mystery series, and I'm going to read from chapter 1, which actually isn't the first chapter, so I'm going to be a little bit different. There was a prologue, and basically chapter 1 starts, Sophie is a photojournalist. She has agreed to take photographs of the home of a man named Quill Russell, who was a former Secretary of State, now retired, has sort of a consulting business, was her late husband's former employer. And she really doesn't want to take these photographs because it's not what she does. She doesn't do interiors, but he persuades her. The pictures are going to be of this beautiful estate they have outside of Washington in a pretty little town called Middleburg. And he wants the pictures of the house in all seasons. He and his wife have owned it for a quarter of a century, and it's going to be put into a book. And he's going to give it to, he's going to give the book to his wife as their silver anniversary present. So she's agreed to do it for sentimental reasons and because she likes Quill. And so she's going out to, so they take on the project a year ago so she can get the house in all seasons. So it's 13 months later, she's going out for her next to last trip. So here we go. And I think I need my glasses. Okay. All right. Chapter 1, October, 13 months later. It was my next to last trip to Fernway, driving the 50 miles from where I lived in Washington, D.C. to Middleburg to wrap up taking photos for Quill's book. I had come on an early Indian summer morning when the Japanese maple that grew near their backyard patio was such a beautiful flaming shade of red it almost hurt my eyes, and the leaves of the ginkgo trees that lined both sides of the driveway had turned a raucous, blazing yellow. The very last pictures, if the weather cooperated, would be when the ginkgos dropped their leaves, shedding them all at once as they always did, turning the dirt and gravel drive into a golden path that looked like the yellow brick road to Oz. I'd gotten some photos last October, but the light hadn't been ideal, so I was hoping this year the weather might be more cooperative. I had arrived early enough during what photographers call the golden hour to get photos of the ginkgos when they would be backlit by the early morning sun, making their leathery fan-shaped leaves an even deeper, richer shade of gold. Ginkgos have always fascinated me because they have been around for so long, 180 million years, in fact, ever since the Jurassic period, making them one of the oldest plants on Earth and considered by scientists to be living fossils because in all that time, they haven't changed. It didn't take me long to get the shots I wanted of the alley of ginkgos. I pulled out I pulled out Quill's house key and unlocked the front door, letting myself in. The first thing that struck me when I stepped inside was that the alarm wasn't on, though I heard a beep acknowledging my entrance. Odd. Quill and Vicky were always so careful about security since the house sat on 20 acres at the end of a driveway that was at least half a mile long. It was also surrounded by woods, isolated and extremely private, which was the reason they bought it. Maybe the maids had come and gone and forgotten to reset it. There were no other cars in the driveway, so that was probably what had happened. I'd have to let Quill know, but for now he was in London on business and wouldn't be back until later in the week. I'd said it myself when I left and let him know when I saw him. The house was Sunday quiet and welcoming, as it always was, smelling faintly of lavender, Vicky's favorite fragrance. She grew it herself, a sweeping bank of hardy Provençal lavender that lined one side of the swimming pool and smelled heavenly. After it finished flowering, she dried it and put the pale purple buds in vintage Macao bowls that she scattered throughout the house. I set down my camera bag on a high-backed chair upholstered in crushed persimmon velvet. The sun streaming in through the front door sidelights made long slanted stripes on the multicolored tribal Persian carpet Quill had brought back from a trip to Iran. I had taken hundreds of photos of every room in this house and by now knew it as intimately as its owners did. There would be a view of the maple and the patio from the library, which doubled as Quill's office when he was here on weekends. I wanted some interior photos looking out the enormous bay window. I'd take the rest out by the pool. The library was probably my favorite room, with its pleasant tang of wood smoke and the faint smell, mustiness mingled with a vague vanilla scent, of their many books. 2 of the walls held floor-to-ceiling bookcases. There was even a library ladder that slid along a polished brass railing. I knew a lot of the titles by now: biographies, books on history, politics, art, sociology, science, nature, religion, even a few novels, reflecting Quill's and Vicky's wide-ranging interests. They were both bibliophiles, in part because of their careers, his as a diplomat and senior government official, and hers as a smart, highly respected journalist who read about political campaigns, elections, and the now unfortunately controversial subject of voting rights for The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The Times, and The Journal. She was also a frequent guest on cable news talk shows. If the books filling the shelves, all of which I knew they'd read, weren't rare or vintage, they were signed by friends who had written them. A mullion bay window dominated another wall. Across from it was a large fireplace with a carved oak mantel and a pair of sad-faced Greyhound Art Deco andirons Vicky had found at a flea market in the Cotswolds on their honeymoon. What caught my attention just now, though, was the briefcase, leaning against a paisley print wing chair that faced the window. Scuffed, well-used, chocolate brown leather, soft as butter, expensive, Italian maybe, an unusual gold leaf emblem that looked intricately worked initials in an elaborate design, although I couldn't tell for sure. Good Lord, was Vicky here? Was that why the alarm was turned off? I didn't recognize the briefcase as hers, but I knew she had more than one for the many facets of her busy life. Her work, her volunteer and community service projects, managing the finances and upkeep of Fernway and their Georgetown home. I saw a flash of motion outside and scrambled to move out of view so I couldn't be seen through the window. All that hostile environment training years ago, and you would have thought I would have known, or at least sensed, someone was here the moment I walked through the front door, especially when the alarm didn't go off. It had been a while since I'd been in a war zone, but this was exactly the kind of carelessness our trainer said got you killed. I shifted again so I could peek outside to see who was out there. It couldn't be Vicky. She was in New York City, appearing on all the talk shows about the upcoming midterm elections. Quill, as I said, was in London. Maybe after all, it was just the pool guy, or the gardener, or a maid who'd gone outside to tidy up, and I was spooked for no good reason. But where was a car or a truck with a logo on it? Besides, there was that briefcase. They were in the pool, melded together as if they were one, wrapped around each other and locked in an intimate kiss that seemed to go on forever. And they were naked, a man and a woman. The woman was Vicky Russell. The man, whose body was turned at such an angle that I couldn't see his face, was not Quill. Taller, a mane of salt and pepper hair, pale skin, not as muscular or as athletically built as Quill. I pulled back, though I was fairly sure Vicky hadn't seen me. Frankly, a bomb probably could have gone off, and she wouldn't have noticed. She was too engrossed in that kiss, her arms fully twined around his neck, pulling him tight into her. It was early to be going for a swim, although it was warm enough on this unseasonably balmy autumn day, and besides, the pool was heated. I doubted they'd just gotten here, so he'd probably spent the night. No, he definitely spent the night.
Interesting. Such a beautiful, gorgeous house, and then we end with something completely different and unexpected.
Yes.
Very interesting. So I got to the first page in your book, and then I had to Google Vivian Meyer. It's like, what amazing work.
Yes, fascinating. Yeah. She was a housekeeper who went out with her little camera and just took tons and tons of street pictures, and nobody ever paid attention to her because she was a maid. And she stored all the photos. And then after she passed away, I think somebody bought the storage locker and found all these photos posthumously.
Wow.
Pushing them. And so she became famous. There are books of her photos out. I think the more famous ones are the black and white photos. But, you know, it's just, it was so fascinating because no one looks at a maid, you know, they're not paying attention.
Yes.
They're fantastic. So.
Yeah. So I've also been to Russia, and it's such a pity that today's aggression exists, because we had a fabulous time there, and there's so many amazing things to see. And so if you're comfortable discussing this, I mean, what do you think is Putin's endgame? What will make him stop?
Well, my husband, I don't know if you know this, but we were sent there. My husband was the first Voice of America correspondent for the to be sent there, and we went there in 1989 when it was still the Soviet Union. My first book, Moscow Nights, I couldn't sell a nonfiction account of our time there, so I ended up writing Moscow Nights, which is a fictional account. So we're still the Moscow group of journalists who were there at that time, because I worked for ABC News under the Voice of America, and we were a very tight-knit group because we were spied on, we were watched. But it was the end of the Gorbachev era, and there was so much hope, and there was so much promise, and we were all so excited about it. My husband got very sick there, so we ended up leaving before the demise of the Soviet Union, when Yeltsin came to power and all the Soviet Union became all these different republics. So I think we had one of the fellows who was a cameraman for ABC when we were there. He's now the director of global media for the Associated Press. So he was our house guest a couple of weeks ago, and we were all talking about it. And I think all of us, all of our friends who are there now, we're all utterly depressed because the country just, I mean, look, you know, they kidnapped Evan Gershkovich. That could have, my husband said that could have been him. He was a Russian. We came after, I can't remember his name, Nicholas Danilov. You know, it's a scary time for journalists. Putin's shutting everything down. The West doesn't really get him. I don't know how it's going to go or where it's going to go, but I don't think it's going to come to a good end. I mean, I think Putin's, you know, as long as Putin's in power, he's going to just keep closing down all the rights and everything. And when you think of, you know, everything that what's happening in the Soviet Union, or sorry, Russia, and what they hear from the outside, how much they've lost. I mean, things like, you know, in Moscow, you paid for the Moscow Metro with your Apple Pay. You know, I mean, when the first McDonald's came and they pulled out, everybody's pulled out. So it's such a chaotic. We'll never go back, never, because I think it's just too dangerous. And like I said, they're pulling all the journalists out. So we were asking our friend who was British. I said, he wants to go back, and I said, will you go back? And he said, I think Putin's targeting the Americans. He said, I don't think I'd be in as much danger to go back, but the American news agencies have pulled out all their, you know, they've left like the local staff, but it's heartbreaking. Yeah, it really is. I can see.
Man, I'd love to talk to you for like about 5 more hours about that, but unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. So one more question, just what attracted you to the idea of the wine country mysteries? Did you get interested in wine or interested in the history of the area? Or both?
None of the above, actually. So by this time we were living in London. My husband's French. Actually, his mother is Russian, his father was Hungarian, but he lived in France. And so we had done all the French vineyards when we were living in Geneva our first post. But we lived over the border in France. So we did all the French vineyards and everything else. And we had a friend when he came home on home leave when we were in London who said, well, you have to see the Virginia vineyards. And my husband was like, why? You know,
seriously?
What does one do with them? So we came back and he took us to the vineyards. And Virginia, for those of you who don't know it, is beautiful. It's a beautiful state. It's the Commonwealth. And we have mountains and we have the ocean, and and so much history. And it's just a lovely, lovely state with crazy politics. But so we get back to London, and my then British literary agent said, well, what do we do on our summer holiday? And I told her about everything. And I mentioned this trip, and she said, oh, that sounds like a great setting for a book. And I said, uh-huh. And I said, well, you know, I've lived in all these great places. I want to write a book with a foreign setting. And she said to me, Ellen, you live in England. Virginia is a foreign setting, and I want you to write. So I said, all right, one. And we came home, and then I've got an American agent, and he was like, well, you know, it has to be a series. And I was like, of course I know that. So, you know,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's what happened.
Very fun. Okay, before we get too late in the hour, let's hear from Doug and tell us about, read to us from Cultured.
Well, Cultured is the 6th in this Jake Longley series, and I call them comedic thrillers mainly because of Jake's quirky take on life and everything else. He seems to see things in a skewed manner. You've already introduced Jake a little bit. He's an ex-professional ball player, and he owns a bar called Captain Rocky's that sits on the sand in Gulf Shores, Alabama. He has a girlfriend named Nicole who is insanely beautiful, insanely brilliant, and snarky, especially to Jake. She if you want to think of something, think of Tracy and Hepburn. She gets her licks in and does not back down. And then he has a friend named Pancake, who is, of all the 24 books I've written now, Pancake is my all-time favorite character. He is a big guy, as you will see in this little brief excerpt I'm going to read. And he works for Jake's father, Ray, who is a private investigator. And so Pancake and Jake have their moments, and Pancake also hits Jake upside the head a few times. So in this scene, it's from chapter 1. It's the end of chapter 1, and Jake and Nicole are sitting on the beach in front of his restaurant on the sand near the water. Nicole is sitting in a lounge chair facing the water, and Jake is 180 degrees. He's facing his restaurant, watching all the activities going on up there, and they're sitting there and chit-chatting and all that. And so Pancake lumbered his 6'5", 280-pound frame down the deck stairs and rumbled across the beach toward us. It's amazing the stairs and the sand could support him. He wore tan cargo shorts, a red Hawaiian shirt with a green and yellow floral design, and aviator sunglasses. The light breeze lifted his unruly red hair. Pancake's here, I said. Does it look like good news or bad? Nicole asked. He's smiling that smile, I said. Definitely not good, she raised an eyebrow. For you, anyway. Pancake created a trail of deep footprints in the sand until he reached us, his bulk casting shade. What's up? I asked. I have greetings from Ray. That settled the good news, bad news issue. Greeting from Ray's never ended well. Hell, it never even started well. Ray, my father, is a no-nonsense PI who doesn't agree with my career choices. I mean, my baseball career he got behind, but a bar owner, he couldn't quite grasp. He felt I should be doing something worthwhile. For me, Captain Rocky's was worth all the while you ever wanted. Oh, good, Nicole said. A case. I'm hungry, Pancake said. No earth-shaking news there. Me too, Nicole added. Also not earth-shaking. What time is it anyway? I asked. Time to eat. Pancake jerked his head toward the deck. Carla's setting up a table for us. My table. My manager, Carla Martinez, had long ago attached a permanent reserve sign on the umbrella pole. Three margaritas waited us. No doubt ordered by Pancake, which meant he needed us partially sedated and compliant before rolling out the bad news. Here's what I knew for sure. Whatever news or greeting or message Pancake had would involve a case, a Ray case. Nicole would jump in head first, and I'd get dragged into it. For some reason, that's how these things always went. Well, the reason I got involved wore a red bikini right now. Another thing I knew was that whatever Pancake dropped on us would lead to some scary, convoluted, and potentially lethal situation. It always did. See? That's why I prefer Captain Rocky's to Ray's World. Nicole took a sip. So what is it? So it begins. Pancake smile. Ray wants you to join a cult.
I love that. That's like, it tells you like everything you need to know about all three characters and Ray.
Yeah.
All at once. So that's very, very fun. I like his voice. And I've been, I'm obsessed with cults too, because ever since I read The Road to Jonestown. So if, in fact, if I succeed in getting my 2025 release done as my, get my publisher to accept it, you're going to think I totally stole it from your plot, but I didn't.
Yeah,
okay,
you did.
So I'm making that statement now in public. I actually wrote it like 3 years ago. So, and I can prove it. So, but what got you interested in cults?
Well, I mean, I like the psychology of why people do what they do. Practicing medicine for 50 years, you see people at their best and at their worst. And there's always a reason, and there's much more than just what's going on. People are more than just the disease that they have. They have issues, they have problems, they have family issues, they have financial issues, they have everything. And so all of that are the motivations for why people behave how they behave. I've always been interested in that. What makes people tick? Cults are a very interesting dynamic. And they're not all, we hear about these cults that are satanic cults and religious cults and all that. There's a million of those out there. But there's other cults. There's cults of personality. There's financial cults. I mean, Bernie Madoff, that's a great example. That was a financial cult. These people got involved with this guru who turned out to be a criminal. Jeffrey Epstein, that was a cult. And all the people that got pulled into that were under his influence and under his umbrella. Well, in this case, Jonathan Linderman has the Linderman method, TLM, he calls it. And basically what it is, it's the way I'm going to teach you how to make money. Well, ergo Epstein and Madoff. And I'm also going to teach you to be a better person. Oh, doesn't this sound Tony Robbins? I mean, it sounds so good. But then girls go missing. And that's where Ray wants somebody inside. And who better? Jake is an ex-professional baseball player who has cachet. Nicole, who you don't know yet, her uncle was a A-list Hollywood producer. And she actually grew up in Beverly Hills, did the acting thing, thought it was stupid and left. But then she writes screenplays. And she just had a screenplay produced in a previous book that became a smash success. Her uncle produced it, directed it, and they got an A-list actor to star in it. So they have cachet. These are exactly the kind of people these cults are looking for. So Ray says, we want you to go inside and figure all this out. Of course, Nicole is all hopped up for it. Yeah, baby, I'm ready to go, rock and roll. And Jake is like, why me? I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. But he goes wherever Nicole goes. Again, thank Tracy and Hepburn.
Now, with the NASA Center near your home in Alabama, you built rockets when you were a kid. So first, why are boys so fascinated by making things explode? And how did you get interested in being a doctor instead of an astronaut?
Well, I mean, that's a long story, but we watched it. My dad and I watched a documentary on the blue baby surgery, the first blue baby surgery in 1955 on TV. And I told my dad, I said, that's what I want to do. And he said, well, that'd be a good thing to do. That's all he said about it. And I knew right then that I was not only going to go to medical school, I was going to deal with hearts. And I never wavered all the way through. I knew exactly where I was going. All my classmates, they didn't know what they were going to do. Well, I might do this, I might do that. I knew exactly where I was going.
Wow.
I just always did that. But I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and the NASA, the Marshall Space Flight Center's there. Von Braun and all his people were there. It was, I didn't know people didn't have a space program in their backyard. When you're a kid, whatever is your world is your world. But I can remember playing Little League Baseball and the ground would start shaking. And they would call timeout, and invariably everybody would look to the south, which is where the Space Center was, and he would be test firing another rocket. and they were all static firing there. They didn't put them in the air. So a big steam cloud would rise up, and that would last for 2.5 minutes, and the ground stopped shaking as they play ball. That was part of my growing up. So yeah, we built rockets as a kid, and it's interesting. We made my little sister Melinda be the ignition officer, because every time we built a rocket, we had to have a platform. We had to have a way to ignite it, and so we would put gasoline in the mayonnaise jar lid and make her light it and run away. Little sisters, baby, it's what they're good for. Yeah. And how she turned out normal, I'll never figure out, but she did.
Yeah. And she still speaks to you.
Oh yeah.
Okay, quick question though. What is a blue baby?
A blue baby is a congenital heart disease where it's complicated physiology, but it's where the right and the left sides of the heart are connected, and the pressure's on the right side, which is the venous side where the blood comes back to the heart, and the arterial side where it goes out to the body.
Right.
Venous blood is blue, arterial blood is red, but if the pressures get higher on the right side, it shunts over through an opening in the heart and what happens is the kids get blue. This happened to be what we call tetralogy of Fallot, and it was the first procedure done on the heart, because nobody touched the heart. If you want to know about all this, watch a movie called Something the Lord Made. Alan Rickman stars as the surgeon, the great surgeon, Blaylock, and then Helen Taussig, the pediatrician. And it's how they came up with the Blaylock-Taussig procedure, which interestingly was the documentary my dad and I watched, was that first procedure. And interestingly, many years later, I ended up in Houston, Texas with Denton Cooley, who trained there. And he was one of the fellows that operated on that first child.
Oh, wow.
Wow. But watch that movie, Something the Lord Made. Alan Rickman plays, Alan Rickman. I love that guy. Hans Gruber, but whatever, he was great as Blaylock. But that's what got me started down that road. And like I said, I never wavered.
Yeah, if I was going to be a doctor, I would definitely be a cardiologist, because when I was, we're old enough that we remember film strips. Remember in grade school, the wheel in the AV cart, and I saw this. They showed us this movie called Hemo the Magnificent, and it was all about circulation.
Right.
And I looked it up because I never forgot that movie. I mean, I remembered it so clearly that now that we have Google, you Google anything that pops in your head. And it was actually directed by Frank Capra, which is probably why it was so good. But I've been fascinated with circulation ever since. It's like the autopsy. I mean, lots of times I have to attend autopsies, especially if it's and the doctor will be dissecting all the organs, and I don't really pay any attention until they get to the heart, and then I'm like over their shoulder, looking at it. So,
basically it's being a plumber, except plumbers make more,
True. But one last question: what was your favorite TV show to work on? And how did you get involved with, living in California, but how did you get involved in screenwriters, and how can I get that gig?
Yeah, well, I mean, it mainly was Lee Goldberg and Matt Whitten and Paul Guyot and guys like that who I met in writers conferences, and and they would ask me questions, and then I would work with them on story and how to get the science right and all that. But I think probably the best ones were Monk. Lee Goldberg wrote all the Monk books, and I think I helped Lee with every one of the books. And it's also Diagnosis Murder, a bunch of those. In fact, there was one book that Lee didn't have any medical stuff on in the Monk series, and he put in the acknowledgments, I didn't have any medical issues in this series, but in this book, but had I would have called Lee's a good friend. But I mean, Monk was great. What a great character. I mean,
I love that show.
Character.
I've seen every single episode.
Diagnosis Murder. It's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah, watched all of those. My husband got hooked on Royal Pains, which I don't really know why, but watched every single one of those episodes too.
Yeah, I wrote the 2 tie-in novels for that, and that was interesting. That was interesting.
Very, very cool.
It was a good series. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was good. So unfortunately, we're getting short on time. I don't know. Chris might have some questions from the audience to ask. I'll ask Chris. But other than that, let's do a quick round robin, very quick round robin. Okay, I'm going to go clockwise here. Valerie, do you, well, Val and Lynn, since you write together, do you plot or do you make it up as you go along?
You do both.
No, you can't do both. You have to pick one or the other.
We're planters. We're planters.
You were.
Planters. Okay,
we do have a couple questions.
Okay, good. Well, wait, let me finish this little quick round robin here. Ellen.
Planner, absolutely a planner. I write in scenes.
Yeah, me too. Tosca.
Loose plotter, slight hybrid, loose plotter.
So you're sliding kind of toward the plantser. You know. Doug, yep. Plotter or pantser?
Pantser, totally. I have one scene in mind and I run with it.
I don't know how you guys do that. Okay, Chris, take it away. What questions do we have?
One of the questions by Vicky Waters was for Doug, and she wants to know what was the most interesting medical question you've ever gotten from an author.
Well, I've gotten so many. I've got over 6,000 questions, but I think one of the funniest was this girl, her father was having an affair with the woman next door, and she wanted to get even. Teenage girls, she wanted to get even. And teenage girls are diabolical human beings.
Oh,
you probably already know that, but they're diabolical human beings.
Do not underestimate.
Yeah, and she babysat for this woman's kids, you know, at times, so she had access. So she had condoms in her, you know, drawer. And I have one word for you. Tabasco. I told her to put Tabasco on the condoms. It would dry. She wouldn't know it was there until things got going. That's probably the best question I was ever asked.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then for everyone, Leica Haney wants to know, who has been your hardest character to write about and why?
So,
anybody?
Well, I've already said Pancake. I think Pancake's a great character, and everybody loves him because he's big and oafish looking, and he was a, you know, offensive lineman in football. That's where he got the name Pancake. His name, Pancake Blocks. His name was really Tommy Jeffers. But he is insanely intelligent, and he is a wizard at electronic data. He just has a knack for that stuff. And of course, he can crush you with one hand. So there's that. But he's just a fascinating character. And people who read my Jake books say we want more of Pancake.
Is he hard to write?
Oh, no. He's easy. He's fun. He's, you know, most characters.
You answered the wrong way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hardest.
Yeah, who's the hardest?
It was interesting. We like the answer, but what was the hardest character?
I thought best. Oh, man, I don't know. They're all easy, I think. You know, you live with them for a while and they're fun. Otherwise, don't put them in the book.
Yeah, I think ours was in our second book. Last time I saw you, it was Kate. And she was hard because she was too perfect initially. And we kept trying, you know, we kept trying to find her, what were her flaws, and we changed her name a few times, right? Because we had a hard time relating, but then I think we finally got to a point where hopefully where we liked her, and she was.
I think Sloane in the current books, Senator's wife Sloane was initially difficult because she is ill and she's in bed, and we had to make her more than her illness and her being this poor, pitiful thing who was feeling sorry for herself, or that the reader was going to feel sorry for it, and give her some personality because she's the protagonist. So that was that was difficult. We went round and round with Sloane.
Well, we got her out of bed too. She in the first round she was in bed a lot, but yeah, she
got her out. Yeah,
cool. In the third book that I wrote in my bird watching series, I wrote it with a male perspective, and I think that was the hardest for me. editor struggled with Eric, and I'm like, I struggle with Eric, and I had my husband read it, and I said, what am I doing wrong? And he'd read and he'd go, yeah, well, a guy wouldn't angst like that. Yeah, no, a guy wouldn't angst like that. You know, he kept pointing out the flaws in what I was having the male character do, what a woman, you know, handling things like a woman might process it instead of the way a guy would. And I added a female protagonist to go along with him, so I could not have to write quite so much of his POV. And then it was, it was terrible.
Okay, Ellen?
Yes.
Who is your hardest character to write?
Well, I was thinking about that, but I wouldn't have said it was, but in the book that I'm writing now, the book that came out, Blow Up, that came out, Sophie's best friend, she went to school with her girlfriend named Grace, who's now a reporter for the fictitious Washington Tribune. And she went to school with a guy named Jack O'Hara, who's now a Jesuit priest who teaches ethics at Georgetown. And they dated each other in high school. And it was kind of a sweet thing. And then he went off into Rome and he became a Jesuit and everything else. So for this book, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an ex-Catholic priest. And he said to me, Jack's too perfect. He said he needs a
Yeah.
he's, you know, he's good looking, he's this, he's that, you know, we think of, you know, you know, and he said he needs a flaw. And so I gave him the flaw of ambition, and it ended up tilting the whole book. And so, yeah. So I made it.
Interesting. Yeah. And Tosca, who's your hardest character?
You know, one of my hardest was from a historical novel I wrote, and that was Jesus Christ. I wrote.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about Judas Iscariot, and Jesus Christ was a big part of that. And so there's that. But it was just because of this pressure I was putting on myself to, you know, try to please everybody. Once I took that out, I was able to be free. So beyond that, though, in A Single Light, my most recent thriller, I had a nonverbal character who had a wicked sense of humor. He was extremely funny, but it had to all be portrayed through his actions. And so he's probably one of my favorite characters I've ever written. I absolutely loved him. His name was Otto, and I just fell in love with him.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Unfortunately, we're already over time. So if there are no more questions, then we will wrap this up for the evening. This has been so much fun. Join us, for you viewers, join us next month on June 19th to hear from authors Kate White, Steve Berry, Richard North Patterson, and our own Isabella Maldonado. So thank you again, authors, for joining us tonight. This was great fun.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyable.
Thanks. And Chris.
Bye.